Yavapai County Master Gardeners. Let me just, got it, okay. Gardeners, we are part of the University of Arizona Cooperative Extension. Every county in Arizona has a cooperative extension office, and you may be familiar with some of our other programs such as 4-H, food safety, nutrition education, STEM and commercial horticulture, and small acreage support. Master Gardeners provide science-based horticulture information to the public. Tonight's presentation is on companion planting. Tricia Michelson is our speaker this evening, and she's been so interested in this topic. She is a die-hard veggie gardener, certified as a master gardener in 2013. And believing that gardening is a continual experiment, Tricia takes on new gardening challenges each year. And she grows vegetables both inside her house as well as outside, and loves sharing the joy of gardening through public speaking engagements throughout the county. Take it away, Tricia.
All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to tonight's presentation, which is the art of companion planting. I always like to start out and work with a definition. So pretty much a standard definition for companion planting is a gardening technique where different plant species are grown near each other for mutual benefit. As I was putting this presentation together, I found one that I like even better. Companion planting is best defined as the practice of planting different plant species in close proximity so they can offer identifiable benefits to one another. Sometimes the benefit is one-sided, with one plant selflessly offering most of the partnership advantages to the other. And I think in many cases that is true. We end up having some sacrificial plants in our yard. But why use companion planting? It's something that I've known about since, good heavens, the 70s. Does anybody in the audience remember Rodale books? They popularized companion planting. But this year I decided to really dig in, and I realized that companion planting is used to affect a change in your garden. So, do you hate seeing your tomatoes ravaged by hornworms? I know no one's saying yes to that. Have aphids infested the plants and trees in your garden? Would you like to attract beneficial insects? Or could your lettuce benefit from some shade this summer so it doesn't bolt? Or are you just looking for a more natural way to grow your plants? All of these are excellent reasons for choosing companion planting. And as a master gardener, I have to say, where's the science? Because everything I've been talking about is pretty fluffy. It's really not science-based. So companion planting is not a proven science. The basis for this type of gardening comes from folklore and experimentation. Organic gardeners have spent years trying different types of plants and herbs near other plants and vegetables. And you have to ask, why is science so limited in this area? Because it is truly a hugely popular subject. Well, you look at scientific methods in the definition, and the definition from Merriam-Webster is principles and procedures for systematic pursuit of knowledge involving the recognition and formulation of a problem. Well, we can pretty much figure that out for plants in our yard. The next part, though, is the gotcha, the collection of data through observation and experiment. And therein lies the problem with science and companion planting. There's issues that are faced. Probably the biggest one is the control of the variables. Can anybody control the weather? Can anybody control their soil? To some extent you can, but my soil in Prescott is way different than the soil that Lauren has in Prescott Valley, and certainly way different than over in Sedona or down in Black Canyon City. And those are all part of just our county. And companion planting is a worldwide occupation, if you will. So control of variables is really tough. The other thing that goes along with that is repeatability. So while companion planting and science don't necessarily go together, companion planting does fit into the world of horticulture, because horticulture, well, before I get into that, one study that I did find that I liked a lot was at Iowa State University. And the objective of the study was to determine if there was an advantage to intercrop plants for enhanced growth, and to determine if selected companion plants would provide protection against common vegetable pests by methods of trap cropping and biochemical pest suppression. We're going to talk about both of those terms later and what that really means. And I like this study because it was really about a small sample size. We only had 5 vegetables and 5 companion plants. So it was easy to understand what they were doing. The data was easy to look at. In this study, however, they had abnormal weather conditions, which produced anomalies. They had disease and insect infestations that were completely unexpected. Goes back to that control aspect. So they ended up saying their results were indicative, but not conclusive. Here, though, is the way the data came out. There were the 5 vegetables, and you can see, I'm looking at the lettuce chart here. If you see my cursor, it says percent of damage is running up and down the left side. Your companion plants are running up and down the right side, and then there's a time schedule. And probably the best chart to look at is this cabbage one in the far right-hand, lower right-hand corner, because the control plot showed that there was 100% damage in the control plot where beneficials companion plants were not used. They did have problems with their broccoli and their cabbage and the number of companion plants that they were actually able to grow. But when you look at these, you can very much see that the results didn't necessarily support in a grand way the companion plant. Yes, the marigold did a wonderful thing in the zucchini area, and not so much in tomatoes. You know, it's on the outside of the control line. So these results were interesting. And their observations were that they felt in the end that there was evidence that planting multiple species together will always invite less pest pressure than one single crop. I think always is a little strong. They also found specifically that planting marigolds around zucchini plants significantly reduced the damage from squash bugs and striped cucumber beetle, and that nasturtiums had a similar effect on reducing the population of squash bugs. Good, interesting data, small sample size. There are other notable studies. The be-all end-all of companion plants, we always hear of marigolds, and I found this to be most interesting. The marigolds, the African and French marigolds specifically, have roots that produce biochemicals that are toxic to root nematodes. However, you don't get it while the marigolds are growing. You have to actually use them as a cover crop and till them in. So marigolds do produce have good benefit, and we'll see some of that later. But we have to realize that sometimes the benefit may not be when the plant is actually growing. Some others that proved notable, the flower heads of certain plants within the aster family, when powdered, constitute the active ingredient in the insecticide pyrethrin, which opens up a whole, wow. We can see how the product of a plant could be very beneficial. Then dill and coriander are flowers that encourage predators to basically encourage the Colorado potato beetle and keep it away from the eggplant, and not just the eggplant. those two were actually proven to do a lot more, but in this particular study, it was eggplant. And then sweet alyssum, the presence of it in lettuce fields actually helped with the reducing, aphids, and produced more hoverfly. And I don't know if you all know what the hoverfly is. We have a lot of them here, which is wonderful. They're a very beneficial insect. They look like bees. And I thought for a long time they were bees in my yard. Even their wing structure, and I'm not an etymologist, but even their wing structure looks like bees. And I was always trying to shoo them away. And now it's like, I want more hoverflies. So horticulture, as I was starting to say a while ago, is actually the science and art of growing vegetables, flowers, or ornamentals. So I'm looking at companion planting rather than being in the science arena as really being a lot more in the art arena, although we'll see some more science coming up later. But we have to talk about the beauty that companion planting brings along with the perceived benefit. And there are benefits that people have found over time, but it's by practicing in your yard with your plants. And we can take clues from lots of things we're going to talk about now. So how can a plant be a companion? Well, first of all, it can be used to save space in your garden. If you plant early short season crops with later maturing crops, you can get double dew in your plant bed. So you might plant lettuce or spinach or basil early when it's cool, and then transplant your peppers or tomatoes into those beds as the first crops mature. You can also plant slow growing crops next to quick maturing crops. So planting radishes and carrots side by side, and that's what you're seeing in the picture below. And with that, this is called intercropping, where you're putting plants of different types in alternating rows. And you're actually typically plant intercropping closer. And what that does is often helps weed management and also soil health. So your intercropping can keep soil from eroding and blowing away in our wonderful winds that we have. You can also use companion plants for soil health. So planting crops with different root structures together aerates the soil and allows plants to pull nutrients from different parts of the soil profile. And you see, I put a little picture of the soil profile up there for you because there's lots of layers to our soil, and all plants don't reach the same depth. Plants like carrots and potatoes, they're going to help break up that compact soil, reaching down through the organic level into your topsoil. Now, your deep-rooted crops like your melons and tomatoes, they will keep reaching down through the leaching horizon and on into subsoil even. So they're digging their water and their nutrients from a much deeper level. Thus, everybody's not pulling from that same simple topsoil organic level. More on soil health, you can add legumes like peas, beans, and clover to improve your soil health. The legume family is known to fix nitrogen by pulling it from the air and creating nitrates to enrich your soil. Can help to even reduce having to add some fertilizer if you're doing it well. So an example would be to add edible legumes like peas, it could be sugar or snap, beans, could be green or hard shell for harvesting, but then also they're enriching the soil while you're also being able to harvest. You can also use a legume, red clover is a great example, as a cover crop underneath your main crop. While your main crop is growing, it's enhancing your soil. Okay, you can also use them for mutual support. If you have large or tall plants, they can provide sun protection and shade for smaller plants, like tomatoes with carrots. You can also use the shade from some plants to keep others from bolting. Pole beans with cabbage. We had talked about the lettuce being protected a little while ago. So that's nice. Even nicer is shelter plants, because large and taller plants can provide wind breaks, and heaven knows we have tons of wind here, as well as providing protection from heavy rain. Our monsoon rains can be killer sometimes. And if you're using these plants as ground covers, like your red clover, or intercropping, you can help prevent the erosion of soil during heavy rain and wind. And another classic example is physical support. And we always look to that Three Sisters model as a good example of this. This is the traditional picture of a Three Sisters garden. It consists of corn, beans, and pole beans were the traditional in the Iroquois tradition, and summer squash, your plain old yellow squash. To do this, it's really simple. You simply plant the corn. Then when it's about 6 inches tall, you plant the pole beans around the stalk. And then next to that, on the outer edge, you plant your squash. Now, it doesn't have to be these 3 plants. It could, in place of the corn, you could use sunflowers. In place of the pole beans, you could use any runner bean or lima bean, anything, any of your climbing beans, not your bush beans. And then in place of a squash, you could use a melon, virtually any kind of squash. It doesn't have to be summer squash. And if you're looking online and you see pictures of the Three Sisters, you're going to see a lot of them that put pumpkin. With pumpkins, I would caution you, because pumpkins can get really big. Their vines are very invasive, and they may prohibit you from getting close to picking your beans. So if you're going to use pumpkins, you probably want to use a small variety. Here's another picture of the Three Sisters in actual production mode, and this is in what we would call a mound. Three Sisters can be done in mounds, it can be done as borders, it can be done in your traditional box gardens. It's very flexible. We'll see another picture of this later on, but I believe it's called Native Seed Company out of Tucson produces a wonderful white paper on this. And they've got all sorts of different diagrams and talk to you about how to do it. In my acknowledgments, I do have a link to the PDF and to their website, so you can refer to that. Another thing that companion plants are known for, and this is very big, is insect management. And you're going to hear a lot of repeating here. Plants can be used to either attract beneficial insects or repel destructive insects. The 3 primary ways that they're purported to do this, and this is not scientific, we're talking soft, is producing a variety of smells and scents, which we know they do, providing habitats and food, or being visually distracting or attracting. We can probably prove the first 2 pretty easily. The visually distracting or attracting might be a little bit harder, but in your own garden, you could prove it to yourself. Now, with the smells, the odors that are put off by plants can either repel or attract. And the odor of one plant can mask the odor of other plants. Now, these odors can be used to attract the pests away from a plant to another plant, and that's called trap crops. And I have a slide just on that, or a couple slides on that later. And odors can be used to deter or repel them, and those are considered repellent crops. And when you have just a whole bunch of odors going on, there can be too many signals to the insects, and they really don't know what to attack. And oftentimes in garden pictures where you're looking at companion planting, you'll see just a mass of vegetables and flowers together. And that's where they're trying to use this type of variety to confuse those insects. Now, as far as attracting, predators or parasitoids. The predator insect eat other insects, and the parasitoids lay their eggs inside other insects. So those are great to have in your yard. And providing food and a habitat for those predators and parasitoids attracts them to your garden. So you want to know the plants that are going to do that so you can include those in your garden. And the visual distractions, intersperse plants with different heights, different colors, different odors, different textures. All of those may make it more difficult for insects to find their target. Or they might find one they like better before they make it to the one you really wanted to save. Now, trap crops are ones that are placed in the garden in somewhat a sacrificial capacity. These will go back to that definition I said I liked in the beginning. They attract insect pests away from the primary crop you're trying to protect. The pests congregate on the trap crops in larger numbers rather than on your other plants. And so trap crops are ones that are actually being looked at in different studies, like the Iowa State one we looked at, specifically to see if they're worthwhile and beneficial, and we're finding out they are. Now, common trap crops, radishes is a very popular one, and I hate to think of radishes as being sacrificial, but since they're quick growing and easy to grow, they're pretty good among many vegetables. They're an excellent one to use. In the flower world, nasturtiums are known to be just outstanding. Marigolds are good. Nasturtiums are actually indicated better in many cases as a trap crop, and specifically flea beetles and aphids. Mustard, I found several references to it being your brassica's best friend, because there's many insects that love mustard more than they love your brassicas. So if you're growing some broccoli, if you're growing some kale, you may want to put some mustard around them, because the mustard is actually going to trap them and protect them. Now, sunflowers are reputed to be great trap crops for stink bugs, and we have plenty of those up here. They are also wonderful around aphids, because the aphids love the sunflowers. Something that you'll need to know about sunflowers is they do emit something other than positive things into the soil, and so you have to be careful where you put them, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Stinging nettles is not typically thought as something you put into a vegetable garden, certainly isn't a crop, but it attracts a broad spectrum of insect, both pests and beneficials. So it's a great border plant to have around the outside of your garden, to be calling insects to it, rather than to, especially the bad insects, to it. Oh, and plant charts, companion plant charts. If you go out on the web and you look, these are clips from 3 different browsers. The first clips that came up, I just stacked them all together on this screen. Should we use them? Should we not use them? Well, some of them repeated on all these, and if you look closely at them, oftentimes they will disagree with one another, because it's not science, it's not proven. Somebody will have put together a chart, or a group will have put together a chart that worked for them, but somebody in another state or another area may not find it beneficial. So using them as a reference can be good. I tend to like a website called Harvest to Table, which I also put in the acknowledgments. And Harvest to Table has almost every garden vegetable I would grow, almost every herb that I would grow. And it goes into great detail in picture and word on how to plant that plant, how long it takes to grow, what temperature it likes. And it always includes, for most of the plants, its companion plant and plants that don't work well together. So I tend to like to look at that last and see what something says. But plant charts can be interesting. There's even one, I can see it out here, down here on the bottom. It's an eye chart. Oh my gosh. But it includes not only plants that are companion, but what insects they repel and attract. That's probably why it's such an eye chart, but it is an interesting one. Okay, so what plants play well together? We can see in this garden, it's a beautiful garden. We've got some cabbage and some nasturtiums going on in there. It's just beautiful. And there's some plants that play really well together and some don't. So let's look at the ones that do. And I am stuck there. First, probably one of the more popular combinations is tomatoes and basil. And the pungent aroma of basil can help repel insects like tomato hornworms and whiteflies. And it's been said that basil can also enhance the flavor of tomatoes, making them sweet and more delicious. I want to try it to see. Looking at this picture, that gal has gorgeous basil plants. Tomatoes can also be shade producing plants for the basil as they get larger and larger, keeping the basil plants from bolting later on in the summer as it gets too hot. Another very popular one is carrots and onions. They're often planted together because they just do well. Onions are a natural pest repellent. The whole onion family is. And it keeps away the carrot flies as well as other pests. And carrots are an attractor for insects. And they attract a lot of beneficials, which can help protect the onions. So these plants are working hand in hand. It's not a trap crop situation. And the strong odor of the onions can mask the pleasant odor of the carrots. So your carrot tops can actually come out looking nice. Potatoes and marigolds are one that are well known. And we have to remember that when this says marigolds can help repel pests such as nematodes, that's when they're actually used the next season. You're growing them where the marigolds were the season before. But they will, during their season, attract beneficial insects such as ladybugs and lacewings. And they can also inhibit the growth of weeds around your potato plants. Cucumbers and chamomile. Chamomile is a very fragrant plant, and it attracts our hoverflies and wasps that will prey on those cucumber pests. Plus, chamomile gets tall, and it can provide some shade for your cucumber plants. Lettuce and chives work well together. Chives have that insect, same as onions, insect repelling properties, and they can deter aphids, slugs, and snails, and things that like lettuce. Plus, the chives can improve the overall health of the lettuce plants by attracting pollinators like bees and butterflies, so you can get a better lettuce crop. Here is our last picture of the three sisters, beans and corn. We'd already talked about some of the benefits, but the beans are fixing nitrogen and the corn really requires more as it's growing. In this picture, you can see that she's got just a few beans around some of these. There's more in some of them, and kind of spotty on putting some, looks like it's probably going to be yellow squash out there. And we had talked about using radishes as a trap crop. Well, that means your radishes are going to kind of get destroyed. So I got this beautiful picture of radishes because the chervil can actually protect your radishes. They're going to attract hoverflies, and which will control the insects that are going for those radishes. It's also said that the chervil will improve their growth and flavor. I've got to try this to see if this is going to work. But I can definitely see where the chervil would help protect the radishes from damage. Another very popular one is borage and strawberries. And the borage helps repel the pests that attack strawberries, and it attracts pollinators. And it's said to enhance the flavor and vigor of the strawberry plants. I want somebody to try that and let me know if it worked for them. But I was able to find a number of pictures where many people have been doing this. Thyme and eggplant. Thyme attracts the beneficial insects like bees and predator wasps to control pests. And I think you're getting the theme. It's all about controlling, either deterring pests or calling them in. And it all comes down to, in many cases, scent, like the calendula's strong scent, which can repel pests that might attack your broccoli, like aphids and whiteflies. So a lot of these combinations are doing basically the same thing. This one I thought was very interesting. It's a very popular one, rose and garlic. Never would I ever thought of that myself, but garlic is believed to repel aphids, and aphids attack roses. And it also can deter Japanese beetle and other pests. And there's gardeners who actually believe that garlic improves the health and vigor of roses. And it makes total sense because the roses are providing a nice shelter for the garlic at just the right time. You can still get in there and cut your garlic scapes when they come up, but it really does some nice fill in of some of your area around your roses. So I thought that was a pretty nice concept. Another popular one is your cabbage, which we saw on the front page, is cabbage and nasturtium. And the nasturtium's got a pretty strong odor, and it helps to repel cabbage moths. So just like we have plants that should be grown together, we definitely have plants that should never be grown together. And when I looked at this picture from Taste of Home, I thought, that's just about says it all, even though I'm going to say more. These combinations should never be put together. They all have conflict in one way or another. And poor fennel down in the middle at the bottom, he doesn't belong with anybody, okay? The only good place in your garden for fennel is with flowers. I hate to say it, but fennel even puts things in the soil post-growing that can cause problems the next season. So, questionable plant combinations. Sometimes you have incompatible heights. So just like we were talking, you have positive for shade and for shelter. You can have it on the negative side because it might be that your tomato plant is restricting the light that your bush beans need. So you always want to be very careful in putting plants together that you put them on the right side of the sun. If you want shade, you put the taller plant in where the sun's going to hit it first. But if you've got a plant that needs a lot of sun and is going to stay shorter, you want to put the other plant, the tall plant, on the other side of it. So think about that as you're planting. Now, there's a whole group of plants called allelopathic plants. And these allelopathic plants are ones that have the capability to chemically impede the vital system of competing plants. Now, this is an area that science has really dug into. However, they haven't dug into it in the gardening, vegetable gardening arena the way I would want them to. I think it's coming. Most of the study on allopathy has been in the area of weed management and how can we use plants to chemically impart things in the soil that will reduce or eliminate weeds. But there are some in the vegetable world that I wanted to talk about. Beans and onions beans are considered allelopathic plants, and they do not do well with members of the onion family, such as leeks, chives, garlic, and onion. So those would be two you'd never want to put together, is beans and onions. Potatoes and sunflower. Now, I had talked earlier about sunflowers being really good in certain cases, but sunflowers contain a toxic ingredient that prevents potatoes from growing fully. So while one is growing deep and the other rises high, you'd think that'd be a nice combination, but because of that toxic ingredient, it really isn't. And you'd want to be watching that. I didn't have time to research to find out if sweet potatoes were included in that. Of course, sweet potatoes are a different family than the potatoes, but still it made me wonder. An eggplant and fennel, and like I said, you don't plant anything with fennel, but fennel produces a chemical that slows the growth of nightshades. And so your tomatoes, your eggplant, I think sweet potatoes or even potatoes are in that family. So you don't want to put fennel with much of anything. And allelopathic plants, there's a lot of them that are known to have properties. Walnut, sorghum, and sunflower. Sunflower is, yes, one you would see in our garden, not so much sorghum and walnut, but they release chemicals through their root system. Now, brassicas, pretty much all of them have allelopathic properties, but they don't share the same property like the walnut, the sorghum, and the sunflower. Some brassicas contain a growth-enhancing hormone called brassicillide, and that one, very interesting. Then mustard, when tilled into the soil, can suppress fungal pathogens. And then there's other brassicas that will limit the germination of legumes. So I think as this science develops, it's going to be very interesting for us to watch, because as we find out, sometimes we have things that we've put in our yard and the next season we put something else there and it just didn't grow well. Well, very likely we put something that had allelopathic tendency or capabilities that actually remained in the soil. Something to think about in the companion planting world for sure. So summing it all up, how can I use companion planting in my garden? Well, first of all, you have to identify known issues in your garden. For me, I have a lot of aphids. So I've mentioned aphids a lot tonight, so I know I can find something there. But I can also identify improvements that I could make. So what improvements might you want to make? I've never been much on flowers, and I've really opened my eyes to the value that flowers can bring in bringing beneficial insects into my yard and probably keeping some of the predators out. So plant companion plants that could impact whatever your issues or improvements are. Figure that out. You'll have to do probably a little research, maybe use one of those horrible plant charts, but plant those companion plants. Use it as an experiment. Use it as something fun. Use it as beauty, because you're going to beautify your garden when you do that. Closely monitor what works and doesn't work. And most people are going to roll their eyes at this one. Document it in your garden notes for future years. I'm a super proponent of having garden notes. Doesn't mean you have to have a notebook. I just have an old folder. I've got 10 years of notes in there, but I can tell you what was planted where for the most part in my yard. I can tell you when I had super failures and super successes, and companion plants will now start factoring into those notes so I can see what worked and what didn't work. But most of all, enjoy your garden. Make it beautiful, make it artful. Use companion planting as a success builder in your garden. Here is the list of acknowledgments. It will be at the end of the presentation when we put it up. The links will be there for you. I've included at the very bottom, I didn't talk about it, but I included a link to Yavapai insect photos that we have on our Arizona website, because I think we should all be able to identify what insects we do and don't have here. I see Mary put in the comments, we don't have Japanese beetles in Yavapai County. So you want to be able to identify what the insects are that we have. As you look on the web, many times you're going to see a plant that will do well, and it will do well with an insect we don't even have here. So why bother? Find the ones that really do work here. The ones that most of what I talked about does. Do we have any questions?
Actually, can you hear me, Tricia?
Uh-huh.
Okay, great. So there are no other questions, but I'm just fascinated with this. I have so many notes to myself. It's like, okay, I already started planting my garden and now I have to rearrange some stuff.
Well, the beauty is you can intercrop
Yep.
with what you've got. So, look to that basil. That's always a great one to throw out there. Throw some nasturtiums in there.
I did a marigold a couple of years ago, and it overtook, it got to be a 3-by-3 foot plant that overtook my entire garden, but it did keep all the bugs away. So,
and it kept some of the weeds away because it was so inclusive over
it
that.
was.
Yeah,
this was fascinating. I have so many things I have to research about my garden right now.
Well, we have a local seed company, Terroir, and they do a lot of cover crops, and they actually look a lot at the companion plants as well. So if you look at their website, they have a lot of good information.
I do have Sylvia said this was great. We were excited to try some of this out. And Lindy from Prescott asked, any recommendations what to plant with berries?
I saw I had the one on the screen for borage with strawberries. I didn't have any others that specifically addressed the fruit. I stayed away from that. Sorry, Lindy.
So question, because I have a strawberry plot which has consumed a 9-by-3 foot area, and I have no place to actually plant anything else in it. But if I plant it near it, will that be okay? Like in a pot next to the bed?
That's just what I was going to say. When you can't add into your garden, put a pot next to your garden, put a pot around your garden. And like in the case of stinging nettle, you can actually do it around in borders, because you're still calling those insects, the beneficials, in, or pulling the predators away.
And Peggy asked, can you post that link in the chat to
Terroir.
Terroir.
She spelled it right. Good job. I would have to kill my session to do it. Peggy, I will send it to you separately.
And
well, thank you all for coming tonight. It was a lot of fun to do this presentation. I learned a lot. I hope I met your needs in giving you some basics, and I've got you started in a lifelong search for the right companion plants for your garden.
And we would certainly love your input along the way to what seemed to work in your gardens to add to our library of ideas. So please keep us posted. And you have earlier I posted how to contact the Prescott and Verde Valley Master Gardener group, and anything you can offer up is always added into our collection of information. Thank you all for joining us tonight. I thoroughly enjoyed this, Tricia. So
thanks,
take
guys.
care. And our next presentation, unknown what it is at this point, will be in July. And we look forward to seeing you all again. Thanks so much and have a great evening and happy gardening.